Let me compliment FICCI for recognizing the importance of innovation and of R&D in India's economic resurgence. Obviously, this has been a big event. Looking at the brochure, 2 days, 12 sessions, 65 speakers. At its peak, 300 people in the audience. There must be a lot of ideas and innovations that have been discussed here already. I had a glimpse of some of the amity ones at the exhibition, and very clearly, there's a great deal that we could. I'm sure that those of you who have attended this regularly, have gleaned from this experience. For too long, we've had a complacent view of the role of R&D in driving economic growth, prosperity, and even social justice. So a civilization like ours, which was once at the forefront of both scientific thought and manufacturing, as late as the 17th century, that was still true. Today, we contribute a measly 3.2% of global R&D expenditure. And that's despite a growth in GDP since 2006. Our overall domestic expenditure on research and development has remained at 0.8% of GDP, while to take China as an alternative example, they've increased from 1.39% in 2006 to 2.08% in 2013. So their GDP was growing and they still managed to increase the percentage. We haven't managed to do that. The unacceptably low level of R&D surely has a correlation with the corresponding low share of India in global manufacturing and trade. The situation persists even as our national passion for jugaad has attracted international attention. In fact, in 2011, I was invited to inaugurate something called the India Innovation Institute at the University of Toronto. So a foreign university was studying Indian innovation. And the buzzword then, I remember, was Indovation, innovations being developed in India. In fact, even today, if you do a Google search for the phrase frugal innovation, the top 20 results you'll find all feature India. And we probably are natural leaders in frugal innovation, imbued as we are with the talent for developing makeshift but workable solutions from limited resources. The Indian kind of frugal innovation essentially conveys a way of life more than just of research. It's a worldview that embodies the quality of making do with what you have to meet your needs. And this is very much in response to local conditions. Indian companies were the first to recognize the opportunities in meeting the previously unknown or at least overlooked demand at the bottom of the pyramid. Shampoo sachets, for example, originated in India a couple of decades ago by creating a market for a product that the poor had never been able to afford. Indians without the space or the money to buy an entire bottle of shampoo for 100 rupees in those days could spend 5 rupees for a sachet they'd use once or twice. But India's leadership in frugal innovation has gone beyond downsizing. It involves starting with the needs of poor consumers, itself a novel term because who knew that the poor could be consumers, and working backwards. Instead of complicating or refining their products, Indian innovators have stripped them down to their bare essentials and made them affordable, accessible, durable, and effective. Indian ingenuity, therefore, has produced a startling number of world-beating innovations. None, one might argue, is more impressive than a car that has not done well in the Indian market, the Tata Nano. It costs roughly the same as a high-end DVD player in a luxury Western car. Of course, there's no DVD player in the Nano and no radio either in the basic model, but its innovations have gathered 34 patents. And they're not merely the result of doing away with frills, including power brakes, air conditioning, side view mirrors, none of which you can find on a Nano, but they reduce the use of steel by inventing an aluminium engine. They increase space by moving the wheels to the edge of the chassis. They relied on a modular design that enables a car to be assembled from kits, all of which proves conclusively that you can do more from less. Then there's the GE Mac 400, which is a handheld electrocardiogram device invented in India. It costs less than $800, and the cheapest equivalent anywhere in the world costs you $2,000. There's a Tata Swatch, a $24 water purifier, which is 10 times cheaper than its nearest international competitor. If you look at the electrocardiogram, it just uses 4 buttons rather than the usual dozen. It has a tiny portable printer which makes it small enough to fit into a backpack or a satchel. It can even run on batteries. And so the cost of an ECG has come down to roughly $1 per patient. Now, the Swatch uses rice husks, which in our country is a very common agricultural waste product, to purify water. Now, if you take the fact that 5 million Indians die of cardiovascular disease every year, more than a quarter of them under 65, and about 2 million die from drinking contaminated water, then the value of these innovations is apparent. Moreover, medical innovations are widespread. An Indian company has invented a cheaper hepatitis B vaccine, bringing down the price, which used to be $15 per injection, to less than 10 US cents per injection. Insulin's price has fallen by 40%, thanks to India's leading biotech firm. The UNESCO science report says that frugal innovation in India is best described by the idiom, necessity is the mother of invention. India's innovation in producing low-cost, high-value products has transformed it into a major exporter of both R&D and testing services to the US. Our share of national exports to the US increased from 4.6% in 2006 to 9.4% in 2011, which is higher than China at 5.76 that year. Now, this is principally thanks to improved progress in R&D, and we need to give more preeminence to R&D in the policies we're adopting. Still, I can't help feeling that our reputation for frugal innovation rests too much on just simplifying things that others have already invented. After all, the car was invented elsewhere, even though the nano simplified it, or the electrocardiogram was invented elsewhere, even though we've now simplified it, and so on for all the examples I've given you. Why should that be? We are the country that invented the zero. We had the world's first surgeons. We are the ones who pioneered so much of technology. You go to Mehrauli and see the iron pillar, which still hasn't rusted after 2,500 years. What kinds of technology did we come up with in the ancient days that even to this day, in the case of the Mehrauli iron pillar, still haven't been replicated? What is it that we have lost in failing to come up with inventions that genuinely are pathbreakers that no one in the world has thought of before us? This is something we really need to think about. And you know, when I talk about inventing the zero, it's not a joke. I saw some kids sniggering in the back. The fact is that you just look at Roman numerals and you'll understand what an extraordinary advance that was in mathematics. Try writing a long number or doing a complicated addition or subtraction in Roman numerals, that indefinite string of alphabets going down the page. You can't. The zero actually transformed the world of mathematics. And indeed, the Indian numerals, as they originally were, before the Arabs borrowed them from us and they came to the West as Arabic numerals, but they were Indian in origin. All those are things we need to be proud of. Well, my friend Professor Mashelkar has instituted an innovation award. Every year he's giving an award now to an Indian innovation that meets a real need in India. And that, of course, he's not insisting that it be something no one has ever thought of, but there was a very interesting example he gave me of the first award winner last year. This was about, I don't know how many of you are aware that these eye drops that are done for essential testing for eyes, you know, we have 15 million people a year who are going blind. That's a serious number of people with glaucoma, cataracts, and other preventable kinds of blindness. But one of the reasons that this happens is that the poor don't go and get tested. And they don't go and get tested, A, because they can't afford it, and B, because they can't spare the time. The tests require the dilation of your eye, so your eyes are blurred for the bulk of the day. And if you're a daily wage worker, you simply can't afford to lose a day's wages to get your eye tested. So you work on until blindness in the end overtakes you. What this Innovation Prize winner had done was to invent a method of dilating the eye and testing it that does not create blurring for a period of time. And therefore, he won this first award. It's an interesting example of how an innovation, a technological innovation took place that addressed a real human need in our country. And we need to see much more of that happening. Now, UNESCO tells us that in 2014, globally, around 1.47 trillion US dollars was spent on R&D. The US, of course, accounted for 28.1% of this expenditure, Europe another 22.7%, so that's already 50.8% just in the West, in the US and Europe. China then did almost 20%, and Japan 9.6%, while India's expenditure on R&D was merely 3.2%, as I mentioned earlier. And it goes up and down. The figures are all rather depressing. China has 1,071 researchers per million inhabitants. India, we have just 160. China is the most populated country in the world with 17.5% of the world's population. Does accounts for 19% of the total researchers in the world. We are the second most populous with 17% of the world's population, but we only have 2.7% of the world's researchers. So these are real problems. Even FDI in India in R&D was only $500 million in each of these years, and that's after it's gone up from next to nothing in the years before. Now, at the same time, there are studies that are a little more optimistic about these trends. Wharton did a study in 2005 that showcased Indian R&D as a sort of three-act play. The first act showing advanced development of products, the second act basic research, software engineering, development, etc. And the third and final act would see American and European enterprises moving to India and making it an R&D powerhouse. I'm not totally satisfied with that kind of three-act play, because I want to see Indian companies actually making our own country an R&D powerhouse, because we need to understand that the production of knowledge and innovation is very much the key to creating economic strength in our globalized world. Our R&D enterprises are, however, now ambitiously moving in this direction, towards fields such as IT and biotech and so on. And they're also improving traditional products like Ayurveda, where there's a lot of interesting R&D taking place. Other sectors, modern sectors, the automobile industry, for example, India is becoming more and more of a center for manufacturing and assembling cars. I don't know how badly that'll be set back by the horrors in Chennai, because Tamil Nadu has been the center of the automobile manufacturing and assembling industry. But there was a prediction last year that we are likely to overtake Thailand in the next couple of years as the world's largest manufacturing and assembling center for cars. That may not happen if the lessons that are derived from the fact that so many car manufacturers had to shut down their factories during the floods are that India isn't a wise place to come in and invest. Most of the multinational corporations are increasingly choosing to set up centers here, though. Initially, lower costs were their attraction, but I think they've gone beyond the low-cost mentality. It's the current skill set of India's workforce, particularly our engineers, who have improved in their ability to innovate, that have inspired more MNCs to find their way here. We have now the largest innovation facility of GE outside the US, out of a 50-acre campus in Bangalore. Hewlett Packard's R&D center, also in Bangalore, is creating technology that will eliminate the need to use a keyboard and substitute them with human gestures. That I think will be interesting for all our mobile phone users in this country. We have also concerns that we may not be capitalizing sufficiently on our resources because we don't have enough infrastructure and research labs available. In 2011, the National Innovation Council recognized 20 industrial clusters which were to be assisted by a $1 billion fund to create an ecosystem for innovation to further increase our R&D, and this was supposed to be done in association with industry chambers. Now, I don't know whether FICCI can tell us how much of that 1 billion actually emerged and helped you all to do the innovation in industry, but my suspicion is we are somewhere short of that target even today. BRICS is being talked about more and more in R&D. It's true that BRICS countries are increasing their expenditure, but we're still woefully behind the standards of America and Europe. McKinsey published a report stating that the BRICS countries presented an opportunity to multinational corporations to expand their markets and widen their R&D. But again, it was a focus on lower costs. And I'm just tired of this lower cost argument, because it's got to be value for money. It's not got to be just lower cost, but high quality at lower cost. And that's something we can stress in our country. Finally, we do need to boost R&D in various sectors, but we need to also do more R&D in education. I just asked a question in Parliament yesterday to our education minister about the lack of innovation, the habit of producing engineers who remain unemployable. Our universities just give about 4% of our total expenditure of GDP on R&D. Now that's absurd, because in the Western world the figures are very different. Universities account for about 25% of R&D expenditure in the West. Our president keeps on hammering away at the fact that no Indian university features in the top 200 of any global ranking. Why is that? Well, these university rankings give a lot of weightage to research. We got a briefing, I remember, from the Times higher education people when I was minister, and they basically said that 40% is directly research, another 40% is on citations, which are usually, of course, a published research. So since we have a university culture where our universities are teaching institutions where little research is done, and research is done in institutions where there's very little teaching, our universities just don't get enough research marks to score highly in the university rankings. This must change. And we need to open this up. And I've suggested that one of the things we should do is have much more interface between the private sector and universities. What's wrong with an IIT going to a university and saying, look, what's wrong with the business? Going to an IIT and saying, we have this idea for a product. Do you have enough doctoral candidates or graduate students who are prepared to research this and come up with an innovative product? If you do, we'll split the profits or whatever, share the patent. There are various ways in which this can be done. It's fairly commonplace in the West. It's practically unknown in India. We need to do much, much more of this. And while I tried to encourage it during my very brief stint in the ministry, the idea seems to have largely been forgotten in the current regime, and I hope it's revived. Intellectual property rights are also an important aspect, because you need to create an incentive for people to come and invest in R&D by assuring them that their intellectual property rights will be respected. That's the only way you can become a technology-driven economic giant, as we are capable of being and deserving being. Finally, I want to repeat a point I've already alluded to when I talked about percentages of GDP, that India has an excellent scientific community that is talented but underfunded. We need to get the global corporations into putting money into the Indian scientific community in order to retain talent in our country. Brain drain has been a cause of worry. It's dismaying that there are as many, in fact, there are more Indians who won Nobel Prizes with American passports than Indians who won Nobel Prizes as Indians. And that's something we need to be conscious of, because in many ways the concern is that our facilities and conditions for research are not as good as they can find in the Western world. Of course, this means universities have to upgrade their quality, but at the same time it also means that we have to make it possible and attractive, and we have to pick cutting-edge things to do. And I'm pleased to say there is one example I can give you that I visited personally, which is at IIT Indore. They have a telescope that's doing some cutting-edge astrophysics research. It's a telescope they built here. Some of the parts were imported, but they built it at Indore, and they are doing a kind of sort of research into astrophysics that there is only one other lab anywhere in the world doing. What's striking there is that the professor in charge of the project is an Indian American who had tenure at one of the top universities in America, was tempted back to his country. And he's assisted by a crew of doctoral students. And the lead doctoral student is a young Muslim boy from a village not far from Indore, who was so brilliant that he won scholarships to every single top American university you can think of. Harvard, MIT, Caltech, the whole lot of them. And he turned those down to work with this professor in India on this project. So there is hope, but there are too few examples like this. I want to see much more of this happening. Let me stress once again that we need to connect the dots between industrial need in the academic curriculum. In fact, one thing we have to acknowledge, however, is that the multinationals have created perhaps 250,000 jobs in our country over the past decade, but their products have been of little benefit or use in our economy. They're mainly using Indian brains to create products for out there. And that's something we need to think about. Only 74 of the 706 MNCs that set up R&D centers between 2003 and 2009 have created innovative products and obtained patents in India. So I think it would be useful if we can give tax breaks and other incentives for these companies to do things that the Indian consumer can use. And I must say that that this is something we still have to work on. So let me conclude by saying that we need to build up our R&D capabilities if we want to maximize our potential for innovation. With government support, a multidisciplinary approach towards R&D, better quality educational institutions, world-class educational institutions, an effective funding model, a young workforce, which demography is giving us, a thriving and influential scientific community, enlightened policy making and the development of science, enhanced technological capability, the presence of private enterprises committed to R&D, and an intellectual property regime that's WTO compliant and WIPO compliant, then India can be a very attractive destination to create centers for R&D. I often used to say when I was minister, look, we have 17% of the world's brains because we have 17% of the world's population. So why do we produce only 4.2% of global research publications? We can do better. And I would love to see the world coming to India, and I'm sure that we will benefit the rest of the world if those brains can be given an opportunity to work on sustainable solutions to make the world a better place for future generations. Thank you again for giving me an opportunity to raise some of these broader themes. I renew my apologies to FICCI and to my fellow participants in this valedictory session. We began a bit later. I will have to abandon you.
Thank you, Dr. Tharoor, but we'll have some innovation and jugaad here. So before you go, if there are some questions.
I can take one or two, but then I have a 6:30.
Two questions, yeah. He's good.
Ji. Yeah, from?
Qatar.
Qatar, okay, right.
In fact, we are promoting the Global Invention Expo in Qatar.
Okay.
Qatar Foundation.
Right.
As your Excellency told about the great history of India, that we got a great history, that we invented a lot of things since last thousands of years. But why India has not become a technology country?
Exactly.
In fact, I was sitting with the chairman of the Qatar Chamber of Commerce talking about all these things. And I said, sir, we want to bring to 100 countries for the Global Invention Expo. They extend all support. They said, Siddiq, if you go for the press announcement and all, if you say inventions and innovations, don't tell India first. Then the people will misunderstand. He will lose the support and all. I told him, sir, we are sitting in the only one Chamber of Commerce of Qatar. But in India, we have more than 600 Chamber of Commerce. We have more than 10,000 technology institutions in India. Okay? And some of our chambers, some of our technology institutions, more than 400 years, 500 years. But why it happened, India could not become a technology country. The reason, we failed in marketing our technologies across the world in a proper way. Like I am from Kerala, I know that Indian people, they need foreign support. So India has to set up Indian technology centers in every part of the world. This is the only solution, because whatever technologies we have to capitalize first before we create the new technologies, because India is already having thousands of innovations.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much,
So
Mr. Sadiq.
we would like to have a support, and we want to set up the first technology center in Qatar with your support, and FICCI, and of course,
very good.
Billionaire Mr. Ashok Chavan. Thank you.
Would you like to say something?
No, I think these are very interesting plea, and I hope that everyone has been listening, and that we can all collectively be of some use to encourage Qatar to also contribute to innovation in India.
Excellent proposition, and I'm sure that Niranka would be taking down your number very soon. Okay, one more question. See, I had warned you that to our students we say either you've not listened or you not understood.
Maybe I just
Okay,
left them
I'll
without-
just ask you one question. Okay, there's one there. I'll leave my question there, sir.
You said that in India we require to set up the world-class institution and education institution. But when we observe the private institution, the salary structures of the private institution to the teachers are very poor. And even though they are giving the salaries to the private institution, I have to do 3 months a grade. Then we have to make such kind of.
I agree with you that we do need to reward teachers much better in our country, and that rewarding teachers is the best way to encourage more and more good people, qualified people to come into the profession. It is sadly believed that a large percentage, I mean, there is a famous old line which says that those who can do, those who cannot teach. I mean, that's unkind, but it's very often the case in our country that that teaching becomes a lower option than various other career options, and often teachers are those who fail to do that. Because the salary structure, I agree, because the salary structure is not satisfactory. So I would agree with you. Now the problem is the economics of education.
7th pay commission is going to be implemented
And the government colleges,
But
yes.
that's only in the government colleges. Yeah.
in private institutions and organizations. Still they are fighting for 5th and 4th and something like that.
No, I agree with you. And what is more, attempts to regulate this have failed. For example, there are some states where the government has mandated a certain minimum salary even in private schools and colleges. And what we have discovered is they pay that salary on paper, but they actually take back a portion from the teachers. And so in the end, the teachers are.
We'll just pick up that question with the Dr. Chauhan, who knows everything about the problem you just raised. One last question, shorter, because he has to leave.
It's always a pleasure to listen to you.
Thank you, sir.
It's a great listening. So we have the data what you have shown. It says we are working on a suboptimal level of investment in R&D. That's why that innovation is also not that driving here. But what is it that motivates that all that MNCs in the world investing in India when so of suboptimal level, but all big houses are coming at the largest R&D houses in India? So there is some misconnect. Can you just elaborate on that?
No, I think they're coming in simply because, frankly, you can get educated talent cheaper than anywhere else. And that too, very often English-speaking educated talent, people who've been educated in English. So there is work that is being done here, which could be done in the West, but at 4 times the cost. And so naturally, that's the incentive to come. If these were truly, shall we say, quality-focused, I think we'd see much more by way of output and patents coming out of these processes than we've seen so far. But broadly speaking, the potential is there, because there is no question that we have bright people. And there is no question that it's not, as some disparagingly have dismissed it, sort of coolie labor. It's much more than that. It's the kind of stuff that can be done elsewhere. In fact, in a totally different area, not technology, if you look at legal services, there's now been a significant growth in the business of Indian trained lawyers actually writing briefs and preparing case notes and so on for American law firms, even though these people are not legally entitled to practice in law. So they are treated as if they are paralegals, even though they're fully qualified lawyers. But they're paid less than a paralegal would be in the West. And they do the work that a lawyer who would be paid 100 times more would be done. So again, there is a certain level of exploitation there, because the lawyer who is using the product of this chap here is charging $1,000 an hour or more, whereas a fellow who's done it here is getting perhaps $100 an hour, if that, maybe less. But the fact is that that's what makes him attractive to hire. If he were as expensive as those who could do the same work in America, they do it in America. Another example we have here is the transcription services in medicine. Doctors in, say, America are, at the end of the day, dictating their notes into a machine. That's then zinged over while the doctor goes to sleep in America. It reaches here when Indians wake up in the morning. A medically qualified person then transcribes the notes on a computer, sends it back to the doctor. When he wakes up in the morning, he has his medical notes all transcribed for the day's work. It's an extraordinary service. It could not be done in America, and it could not be done for an affordable cost. So he's economizing massively on his secretaries and more, and he's getting it done here. the reading of MRIs. Do you know there are MRIs taken in Boston that are being read in India? The technician, the radiologist is here. But you can do this by computer technology. You just have the MRI done there. It's viewed in India, and the technologist is earning a salary that's about 1/4 or 1/5 of what the radiologist, and of course radiologists are scarce in America. There's actually a shortage of them. And so on and so forth. So there are examples like this all over the place. All I can say is that really cost alone can't be there. It's cost plus ability. What I would like to see is that going up to cost plus high quality. There we haven't yet made the breakthrough, because then of course if your quality is of international class, you can afford to raise your costs and pay your Indian talent better, and that will benefit all professions linked to innovation.
We hope so,
services-
and we
Services
have.
are fine. The next Pentium processor is also designed in India and in Bangalore. Intel
But this chap Vinod Dham was working in America when he invented
Yes,
the Pentium
absolutely.
processor.
So
The iPad was designed by a Hyderabad company
now
called
it's
Portal Player.
all that is changed. Geographies, because of the innovation
The
and
iPod.
R&D, geographies are changing, and now mostly, I mean, all our libraries will be on cloud very soon. Just one last thing, Dr. Tharoor. The FICCI has decided to plant a thicket of 5 trees in your honor
Only 5?
at the periphery
the speech was
of
worth more.
Sundarbans National Park, South 24 Parganas, West Bengal, India. And I'll call upon Nirankar to give you this. You are now a certified green person, and we are honored to have you here.